You are listening to We Saw the Devil, an investigative and conversational true crime podcast that deep dives into fascinating criminal cases that are solved, unsolved, or ongoing. From America's Lori Vallow to Germany's Armin Meiwes, we examine and discuss the world's most shocking cases. If you're enjoying the show, don't forget to follow us online. Check us out at WeSawTheDevil.com and We Saw the Devil on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And don't forget, you can become part of the show by backing us on Patreon. Hello everyone, welcome to We Saw the Devil. This is Robin. Jackie will be joining me for our next episode, so you have me all to yourselves for this one. Before we get into that, let's get our housekeeping out of the way. You know where to find us. We are at We Saw the Devil across all social media platforms. And don't forget our Patreon. Check us out at patreon.com/We Saw the Devil. And if you're not familiar with Patreon, basically it's a platform that allows you to support your favorite creators. You choose a tier at a set monthly price. You can even sign up for annual subscriptions. And for us, you can do so for as little as $3. You get a welcome package with a sticker, ad-free episodes, access to our Patreon-only Facebook group, and a bunch of other cool stuff. And you can cancel anytime. If you're liking the show, loving the show, please titty slap that sign-up button for our Patreon. And again, if you would like to support the show but can't do so financially, trust me, we understand. This is a pandemic, it's unprecedented times, and times are tough for a lot of us. So again, probably the most important thing you can do is support the show by leaving us a 5-star review on iTunes. If you have an iPhone, you can easily do so from your phone. If you have an Android, you can do so from your computer. It would mean the absolute world to us, and reviews factor into marketing, sponsorship, things like that. So if you really do enjoy our show, help us out and leave a 5-star review. So let's get into it, shall we? 46 years ago this year, a little film based on a best-selling book by Peter Benchley and directed by Steven Spielberg took the world by storm. It changed everything. And really, who among us to this day doesn't imagine a shark coming up and attacking you while you're swimming in a swimming pool? I hope that's not just me, because that's a little embarrassing. Now that I've divulged my childhood trauma, let's talk about Jaws. Jaws changed the way that people interact with nature, for better and for worse. Not only do people refuse to go into the water at the beach, or, worry about being ripped to shreds by sharks while swimming in their local pool, looking at me, people went out in droves to kill them. That's pretty horrifically sad. If you've seen any Shark Week or any documentary on Jaws behind the scenes, after Jaws dropped, hundreds of people took to their boats to go kill any shark that they could find. Not only all of that, though, but Jaws changed actual policies. Coastal cities and towns were so scared of shark attacks and being perceived like the shitty, greedy mayor of Amity Island that they actually instated new first responder policies for shark attacks. And that's called the Jaws effect. And it's a real thing. Political scientist Christopher Neff coined this phrase in a 2015 study of Australian policy changes resulting from the film. The Jaws effect more or less describes when political actors, like politicians, elected officials, use fictional film narratives to influence policymaking following shark bites. And my fellow Americans, do you ever think about us being the shark attack capital of the world? No? Well, we are. Almost every single year, the US is number 1. We don't often see the headlines in the news about someone being attacked by a shark, though. There are unprovoked attacks in Florida, which is like the world's hotspot, Massachusetts, North Carolina, Hawaii, California, but rarely are they fatal, not like they are in Australia. And when I was living in Portland, Maine for a chunk of time, I remember when two female kayakers went out, capsized, and they were attacked by a shark. Like, it actually tried to attack them, but they made it out alive. For some reason, our attacks here are not fatal, nearly at the rate that they are in Australia. In 2020, there were 57 unprovoked shark attacks worldwide. Now, keep in mind, fewer people were on the beaches due to the pandemic, which thank you guys for that. So the number is a bit lower than normal. So that's 57 attacks worldwide. 33 of those were in the United States with 3 fatalities. There were 18 in Australia with 6 fatalities. What we've learned is that the United States is the worldwide leader in unprovoked shark attacks, but they are rarely deadly. Australia, on the other hand, sees fewer bites but a greater proportion of fatalities. And if you're wondering why in the holy hell We Saw the Devil has turned into Shark Week 2021, bear with me because I promise it's relevant. Australia itself is almost the perfect storm. Most tourism in Australia is related to the beach, outdoors. 58% of the country lives within 30 miles of a coast, and Australians love water sports. And I'm talking about the sporty kind, so all of you can just collectively get your minds out of the gutter, okay? This is a family show. Australia has the most biodiversity of ocean life. And here's where it gets juicy, no pun intended. Worldwide, there are 26 species of sharks that are known to bite humans without provocation. Australia has 22 of these 26 in its waters. So if you want to see what these animals are capable of, just Google Rodney Fox shark attack and prepare to basically have your breakfast come back up to greet you a second time. Spoiler alert if you choose to do this and challenge yourself, he actually survived that and went on to photograph and film more sharks. So happy ending, everybody clap. But why am I talking about sharks? Because in this particular case, both the Jaws effect and mass hysteria molded the way the media discussed it. And many of you guys have seen the horror film Open Water, which is basically a retelling of this case. If you listen to our previous episode where I talked about the town that dreaded sundown and the quote, based on a true story, this one was right up that alley too. It was promoted as based on a true story. And I mean, this is a pretty accurate film. It was super low budget, and it really took the world by storm when it came out as a small indie film for its terrifying depiction of being left in the open ocean. And that's exactly what happened in this case. This episode, is about the tragic disappearance of Tom and Eileen Lonergan. Tom and Eileen met while attending Louisiana State University in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. They both participated in Air Force RTC, and Eileen moved to Texas with Tom after he enlisted in the Air Force and began work as an engineer. Deeply in love, they married with no fanfare, family, or friends. They basically just eloped, got married, and that was that. Tom was known as being kind, incredibly smart, rather introverted, and some called him, lovingly so, a bit neurotic. He was contemplative and secretly poetic, keeping a hidden diary, even detailing the very day he met Eileen. Eileen was more or less his polar opposite. She was adventurous in spirit, nearly fearless. She saw life as just one big adventure with endless experiences that she just had to try. And the only thing bigger than her zeal for life was her heart. She was very giving. And the same for both of them, really. The two believed in giving back to their communities and personal service. So they did what they had been talking about for years. When Tom's contract with the Air Force was up, they immediately signed up for the Peace Corps and ended up moving to Fiji in 1995. But the assignment was a rough one. The island community that they were attached to had no electricity, running water, or plumbing. They found their jobs as teachers really bittersweet. The students weren't really fully receptive, didn't really like them, and would act out in class. Regardless, Tom and Eileen loved the islands and the scenery, finding beauty in nearly every single thing they saw. They also scuba dived as often as they could, weekly at times. Eileen had been a long-time certified diver and got Tom into it as well. It became their passion as a couple. Nearing the end of their 3-year assignment with the Peace Corps, they began to talk about what they wanted to do next. And they made a choice. They would scuba dive around the world in all of their dream dive spots. They planned it out beforehand, where they would stay, how they would get there, and which diving charters they would use. The first stop on their itinerary? Northern Queensland, Australia. The dive spot? the Great Barrier Reef. I mean, come on, who would not want to dive the most incredible reef system in the world? It's 1,200 miles long, has huge ocean swells, and it is home to the largest coral reef system in the entire world. It's one of the wonders of the world. And Queensland is just in general one of the diving capitals in the world. It has a massive industry that sees tens of thousands of divers every single year. If you live in a coastal town, you'll know kind of the similar setup. You have charter boats that will take you out. Well, the Great Barrier Reef has many different coastal towns, little ports, and they have charters. They have charters as small, it'll take out, 4 or 5 people. And they even have these huge boats that can carry between 400 and 500 divers and snorkelers. It is the absolute lifeblood industry of the area and a main source of income for most of these communities. So Tom and Eileen arrived in Cairns in January of 1998. Respecting their budget, they stayed at a modest hostel in its honeymoon suite. They planned to dive, but most charters had canceled due to the weather. You see, January and February are Australia's summer season, like summer months. There's tropical heat, and the humidity can bring in squalls and rain, and that's exactly what happened. The Lonergans were only there to dive, so they ended up finding a charter and went out anyway. Dissatisfied with the murky conditions and the huge waves, they actually decided to wait out the storms and try again. They remained in the hostel, keeping solely to themselves. They weren't an incredibly extroverted couple. They definitely preferred each other's company to that of others. After waiting a few days, with the storms beginning to subside, they booked a dive at Port Douglas. Now, Port Douglas is roughly 40 miles north of Cairns and is considered by many to be the gateway to the Great Barrier Reef. Every single morning, hundreds of divers descend upon the port to one of its many charter boats planning to take them out to a dive site. On Sunday, January 25th of 1998, the Lonergans did the same. They took a bus an hour north to join 24 other divers who chartered the diving company Outer Edge. The weather, by all accounts, was freakishly perfect. Clear skies and still glassy waters. The boat set off on a 38 nautical mile trip for St. Crispin's Reef, an elongate outer shelf and popular dive spot in the Great Barrier Reef. It also has 2 massive dry platforms, which are basically freestanding structures in the middle of the ocean, which are used by many of the diving companies, and it's frequently crowded. If you go on YouTube and you actually watch any of the dive videos for people who go on like any of these charters, a lot of them hit up the same areas. So you may have 500 to 1,000 people at times in the hot months in one particular dive site. The first 2 dives of the day, because it was an all-day expedition, they went as planned. Tom and Eileen were in their element and living an experience that many dream of but never get to do. The third and final dive of the day began at 3 p.m. Due to being expert divers, Tom and Eileen preferred to dive away from the others. They knew safety protocols, as well as how to properly monitor their tanks, so they didn't really feel the need to group dive. In fact, they actually specifically told, not asked, told the charter that they would be diving on their own. They did not want to dive with a dive master on board. Due to their certifications and experience, this was allowed. Now, side note and a little bit of a personal story. One of the reasons this particular case interests me so much is that I'm actually a certified diver myself. When I was but a wee babe, I got into swimming and got on my neighborhood swim team. I may not be good at much, but I was really, really, really good at swimming. At age 12, I was invited by Vanderbilt University swim team to attend their swimming practices. I was then competing at the state level, and my parents hired private coaches, and everyone thought I was going to be an Olympian. Obviously, I sure fooled them. But in all actuality, I just wasn't that into it, and at that point, at 12 years old, I wanted to hang out with friends and have sleepovers and not get up to swim at 3 a.m. Monday through Friday and on weekends. But what really interested me was that at the big complex in Nashville that I practiced at, I would see scuba divers taking a class. I was fascinated by it, so my parents allowed me to sign up, and I became diving certified at 15. I've logged over 23 dives, including, upon my certification, the infamous open water dive that everyone is terrified of and talks about all the time. So kind of have a feel for their equipment setup, and it just kind of brings it home and makes it even creepier to me. If there's a true crime case that mirrors or follows your hobby, it's just a little bit of extra hits home for you. Now, when you go on a dive charter, there are a series of strict safety protocols in place. At least there should be for a reputable dive company. So as you step on the boat, a head count is done. They check your equipment multiple times throughout the day. If you do a full day expedition, a full day dive, your oxygen is monitored. You have your oxygen tank, and most of the time, you are expected to make sure to utilize and portion out your oxygen. The time of the dive is logged, the depths are typically logged, and most charters will actually give you a dive buddy or not let you stray too far from the dive master if you're there alone. When you dive, head count. When you depart, head count. And obviously due to the expanse of the ocean and the fact that so much could go wrong, personal error, equipment malfunction, wildlife, that's always a possibility too. Safety is of the utmost importance. Tom and Eileen began their final dive at exactly 3 p.m. A little after 3:30, the Outer Edge turned on its engines, performed a head count, and set sail back to Port Douglas. They didn't know it yet, but Tom and Eileen Lonergan were not on board. As the boat arrived back at the port, Tom and Eileen were some 43 miles back, bobbing up and down in the open ocean. When the other divers departed and picked up their shoes from the shoe basket in the marina, 2 pairs of shoes remained behind. A lot of times in really heavily dived areas or marinas where a lot of divers go out of, what they have is they have a shoe basket. So on the port or on the dock, when you get on a boat or get ready to get on the boat to go dive, you'll take off your, say, sneakers or shoes and leave them in the basket. Then you'll get on the boat, you'll go out and dive, and then when you come back, you'll pick up your shoes there on the dock. That's kind of like a diving tradition. No one messes with the shoes. No one really steals them. It's just kind of for a good luck, putting my shoes here, off on the boat, come back, get your shoes. It's just this little diving tradition. Everybody else picked up their shoes, but there were still 2 pairs left in that basket. Then the crew found Tom and Eileen's backpacks. They turned it over to the Outer Edge office, but for some reason, nobody was suspicious. Suspicion only arose when a bus driver who the Lonergans had hired to pick them up and take them back to Cairns wondered where they were. He was sitting there, I'm sure checking his watch, being like, where are these people? So he called the Outer Edge's office and no one answered. And then night came. And imagine for a moment how you would feel if you were Tom or Eileen. You just enjoyed one of the best days of your life. A life dream came true. And then you suddenly resurface after being underwater for less than 30 minutes to find yourself alone. Your boat is gone. You watch the sun slowly set, the dead of night, bobbing up and down in the middle of the ocean, alone, in some of the most shark-infested waters on the planet. And if you haven't seen Open Water, I highly suggest you do so. It does an absolutely incredible job conveying the desperation and pure terror of that scenario. No one realized that the Lonergans were missing for 2 whole days. Their dive took place on Sunday. Tuesday afternoon, employees back at the Outer Edge office finally opened the bags that had been left on the boat. They contained passports and clothes from Tom and Eileen. They called the hostel, but the hostel owner was just as perplexed. The couple hadn't checked back in, returned from the trip, been to their rooms, nothing. So he decided to phone police. Wednesday morning, at dawn, more than 30 aircraft were activated to search for the Lonergans. Law enforcement and civilians chipped in. Private planes, private boats. Everyone was trying to cover the 8,600 nautical square miles, starting with the reefs that protruded from the water, hoping that the couple had been able to bring themselves out of the open ocean to the shelves. But no such luck. Then the Australian government dispatched its Navy divers. They spent the entire day looking for the Lonergans, dead or alive. The office of the American Embassy in Sydney was notified, and they contacted Tom and Eileen's parents, advising them that their children were missing. And can you imagine getting that phone call The police also boarded the Outer Edges boat to investigate physically, to try to understand exactly how the couple just disappeared into thin air. The case hit the news and the media attention exploded worldwide, especially in Australia. Everyone was thinking it, but some chose not to say it out loud. There's no way that they could have survived the sharks. One local Port Douglas shark expert and researcher was interviewed. He's an expert on tiger sharks. He said, quote, "I would not like to be out there for 2 days. If you spend 1 hour out there, a tiger shark won't eat you. If you spend 2 days out there, a tiger shark will eat you." And don't forget that during all of these searches, the dive companies were still taking hundreds of divers out to the Great Barrier Reef each day. Still, no sign of Tom or Eileen. The search was called off 4 days after they disappeared. The dive industry began to get a little nervous with such headlines making international news. I mean, goes for everything, right? You don't want tragedy in an arena that is an area's like prime source of income, especially tourism. And kind of like with that Jaws effect, if you recall in the movie Jaws, the mayor didn't want to shut down the beach. He wanted to make that money. And so he basically more or less allowed people to get eaten for the sake of capitalism and greed. That was kind of the lesson behind Jaws. The dive industry, likewise, didn't want these headlines scaring people away. 10 days after Tom and Eileen's disappearance, something really, really bizarre happened. Their dive gear miraculously started to wash ashore on a remote beach roughly 45 miles away from where they were last seen. Aboriginal natives actually found it. A flipper, a weight vest, 2 dive tanks. Everything was in perfect condition and unbuckled. So what that indicates from a diving standpoint is that someone purposely unbuckled their gear. Nothing pointed to a violent end for either Tom or Eileen. It's very important to note that at this time, there were no indicators of a shark attack or anything, ripped equipment, suits, anything like that. Everything was in perfect and pristine condition, no bite marks at all. However, there was one particularly bizarre piece of evidence, and this was a dive slate. Dive slates are often used for writing messages to other divers while you're underwater. It's a writing utensil and then a slate where you can write underwater and communicate with other people. On one side of the slate was just scribble, technical diving issues, oxygen levels, depth, things like that. Now that side was positively identified as Tom Lonergan's handwriting. On the other side was a message. Dated 8 a.m. on January 26th, the very day after they were last seen, it said, quote, "Can anyone help? We've been abandoned by Outer Edge at the Agincourt Reef. Please help us before we die." That written message, however, could not be definitively identified as belonging to Tom Lonergan. After a police investigation determined that a head count had been botched on the boat after that final dive, conspiracy theories started to surface. The Lonergans were eccentric. Did they come to Australia to fake their deaths? To secretly just move there? The chances of pristine diving equipment washing ashore in the same stretch of beach was slim to none. And many locals, most of the locals in fact, believe that they had in fact made it to shore, either on their own or with the help of someone else, like a fisherman or, someone who they had hired. Many of these theories were created and spread by those in the diving industry itself out of fear of its impact on their businesses. But people still wondered. Could it have been a suicide pact? Murder-suicide? Nothing was making sense, and there was no evidence to support any particular notion one way or another. However, one really stuck, and it's a little crazy. In 1985, a man by the name of Milton Harrison faked his own death off of a ferry in New Zealand. Happens all the time, right? People get tired, they want an insurance payout, whatever, so they just decide to fake their own death. But he was also from Baton Rouge, Louisiana, just like the Lonergans. And he just so happened to also be a member of their tiny, tiny little church. Then the sightings began. More than 26 reports came into police with people claiming that they saw Tom and Eileen Lonergan. Once in a map shop asking for a map to northern Queensland. Another in a passport shop asking him how to get a new passport. The Australian media covered almost every single lead that came into police. Why, though, if they were faking their deaths, would they leave their cash and passports behind? Remember how I mentioned that Tom Lonergan kept a detailed journal and diary? Well, it was recovered at the hostel after they disappeared. In an August 3rd, 1997 entry, just 6 months before the Port Douglas trip, Tom said, quote, "Like a student who has finished an exam, I feel like my life is complete and I am ready to die. As far as I can tell, from here, my life can only get worse. It has peaked, and it's all downhill from here until my funeral." In Eileen's diary, an entry was found from January 9th, 1998, just a couple weeks before that particular diving expedition. Her entry read, quote, "Tom explained to me that he is ready to die. He hopes to die a quick and fairly painless death, and he hopes it happens soon. Tom's not suicidal, but he's got a death wish that could lead him to what he desires, and I could get caught in that." She even wrote an entry directed at Tom himself. Quote, "You have a death wish. I believe this wish may very well leave you to be at the right place at the right time to get what you want. I may get caught in that too, as we are physically together so much of the time. It's a risk I take." Both Tom and Eileen frequently wrote about how much they detested their jobs. Eileen wrote, quote, "Our lives are so entwined now, and we are hardly two individuals. I am still Eileen, but I am mostly Eileen and Tom. He is mostly Tom and Eileen. Where we are now goes beyond dependence, beyond love." These journal entries were read at the coroner's inquest by the attorney representing the dive company, The Outer Edge. They wanted to make sure that it was known that suicide was potentially on the table, potentially alleviating them from any sort of responsibility. The official investigation came to an end, with police stating that they believed the couple had perished at sea after a terrible accident with a mismanaged head count on the diving vessel. The coroner listed their deaths as either drowning, exposure, or shark attack. In a later interview, the official in charge of the investigation acknowledged Tom and Eileen's personal diaries, but said that nothing they wrote could have been directly transposed over the facts that were known about their disappearance. And so, their case was closed. But someone did get charged in relation to the disappearance. Sadly, it became clear that there had been a grave miscalculation on the head count before the Outer Edge returned to Port Douglas. Jeffrey Nairn, the boat's captain that day, was charged with manslaughter. He went on trial, but was found not guilty by a jury. The dive charter company, Outer Edge, pleaded guilty to negligence and immediately went out of business. As a result of all of this, a year after the Lonergans disappeared, the Queensland government introduced strict regulations to the state's dive industry. New items like mandatory head counts and a lookout who remained on the boat during dives were added to policy in an attempt to make sure that this did not happen again. As it stands right now, in 2021, there has not been any known sight of Tom and Eileen Lonergan. Nothing else has washed ashore. There is absolutely nothing else to indicate what exactly happened to them. So what do you guys think? Do you think that Tom had a death wish, and he basically brought Eileen into the fray and brought her into something? It was very clear from the diary entries that Tom had a death wish and Eileen was concerned. Eileen very clearly was concerned that something would happen to her. And it does not seem that Eileen wanted to die. Also, if you take into account the slate that people found, it seems like they were in distress. Someone was making a call for help. So it's all very fascinating and it's all incredibly, incredibly sad. But I want to know what you guys think. Do you think that they killed themselves? Do you think there was a suicide pact? Do you think there was a murder-suicide pact? Do you think that Eileen predicted her own demise at the hands or just involvement of her husband, Tom? Or do you think they faked their deaths and they're off somewhere in Australia in a rainforest or somewhere living their best lives? And if you have not seen Open Water, get the chance to see the first one. It really, really does a great, great, great job at just conveying the camera work as a bobbing camera. And that's actually something that no one had really seen before in a film, is they pretty much set the camera on the water. I watched the making of, and I mean, these actors were absolutely incredible. In the film, obviously, they are attacked by sharks and killed, ultimately by sharks. And that's why this case got so much media attention, is because everyone knows how shark-infested Australia is. Everyone just defaulted to, well, they were killed by sharks. And that was pretty much the narrative the entire time that this case was being discussed. During and after, everyone pretty much just immediately defaulted to, well, they either faked their deaths, suicide, or sharks. And so it became this kind of huge thing, especially in Western media, like in the United States and Europe, that they were eaten by sharks. So it spawned the movie Open Water, which then in turn became one of the biggest shark movies ever made because of it. Check it out if you haven't. It is one of my personal favorites, but there is a very, very, very real and very, very sad case behind it. So that is it for today, guys. I had to do one of my personal favorite cases, my favorite mysteries, I guess. Again, you can find us at WeSawTheDevil.com. You can find us across all social medias as We Saw the Devil. We will have a Patreon-only episode coming out over the weekend. And this particular episode is called The Scream of Bus 1170. So I'm going to leave you guys with that hint. If you're interested, again, check us out at patreon.com/We Saw the Devil. Again, we would greatly appreciate it if you would hop over to iTunes or on your computer or phone and leave us that 5-star review. That helps us so very much. We have some killer episodes coming out for you guys. If you haven't checked out our last episode, we had Gina Osborne on again. She returned to talk about crimes against children as well as romance scams, and that was very informational. We will also be speaking with Anita Zanine next week, who is one of the most world-renowned blood stain analysts. She's incredible. So we're going to be talking about everything blood stain analysis and blood splatter analysis. So if you have any questions for her, feel free to email those over to info@wesawthedevil.com. We will be interviewing her on Monday, and then the episode will air later that week. We have some really cool stuff coming up. So again, guys, this is Robin. You're listening to We Saw the Devil. Until next crime.